so graciously enable us to learn Torah, and they also, in addition to that, all the wonderful food that they offer us. So you can see there's a great desire that they have to give us. So we can come here and just enjoy the food ourselves, or we can have another intention in that when we're eating, we know we're giving enjoyment to the host. And by doing so, we're changing our desire to receive to actually a desire to, in some way, to give. For example, let's say a host makes a beautiful banquet, right, with all kinds of delicacies. And the host wants to invite many people and wants people to enjoy all the delicacies that he or she baked and cooked. The guest comes, and the guest doesn't want to eat. Now this frustrates the host, because the host really wants the guest to eat. It really gives him or her so much enjoyment if the guest eats. But the guest feels what we call bread of shame, doesn't want to eat because the people don't want to just be a receiver. We want to be like God, and we want to be givers. So we have a certain amount of shame, it's called bread of shame, when we just receive. That's why you see adolescents, they tend to rebel, because they don't want to just receive. They want to be givers too. They don't want to just receive from the parents. They want to become independent and become givers themselves. The same thing with the guest. The guest has a certain amount of shame that he or she can't be in a position of a giver and is just taking and receiving. And why is there shame? Because we're not being like the Creator Himself, God Himself, who's just a giver. So what happens is that the guest initially refuses to eat. He says, "No, thank you." But the host gets, really insists, "Please eat and partake in all the delicacies. It will make me feel so good." Eventually, the guest realizes that the host is sincere, that he or she really means it, and then he or she decides to eat because they feel that it will really give enjoyment to the host. And by doing so, by eating, the host really feels happy. So the guest decides to eat and give the host the enjoyment. So what happens at that time is that the guest, actually, the receiver, becomes the giver.
Nice.
Because by receiving, he's giving enjoyment to the giver. So what happens then is that the guest no longer feels the bread of shame, no longer feels like just a receiver, and is becoming a giver as well. So in that, what happens is that the two of them create a dynamic of mutual giving and receiving. And this bond is ultimately the goal of all of creation, to be locked into a mutual giving and receiving, in that both become givers and both become receivers, and at that moment they fuse into one entity, into one whole. And what's interesting is in that state, the two together become almost like a new organism, a new entity. And the two, of course, are greater. The whole is more than the sum of its parts. You create an entity, a state of being that is beyond the two individual people by themselves. It's like what Martin Buber talks about in the I-thou relationship. When two people connect on a deep way, where they end up in an I-thou relationship, meaning where they're not using each other for receiving to get something out of them, but they really are seeing the divine in them, in each other. And here, where they're actually giving to each other in a certain way, you create a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. That's greater than the two individual people by themselves. And this is what the Torah speaks about when it says that the Torah is compared to water. You know, is compared to water. And why would that be so? Because if you look at water, it's hydrogen and oxygen, right? And when hydrogen and oxygen are together, are alone, you would never be able to predict that together they would form this entity called water. You could never see the property of water when you analyze each individual element by themselves. But when they get together, they create water. And without water, life could not exist. And what's amazing about water is, of course, the properties of water is that it freezes from top down, so it protects the oceans and the seas from freezing. And of course, water is the essence of life. So Torah is compared to water because it has this property to it that if we understand the Torah in the right way, is that by engaging in Torah, by living Torah, we then become like hydrogen and oxygen, and when we combine with others in this process of giving, we create this entity called water, that's where the water is greater than the hydrogen and oxygen by themselves. The sum, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. And the basic message of the Torah then is to help to activate and refine our desire to receive, to the desire to give to others, and by doing so, we then connect with other people in such a way where we create water and a state of being that's much greater than the sum of its parts. Now,
that's the introduction? Or?
Yeah, this is the
So I'll just
introduction.
stop for 2 seconds.
Yeah.